This is my Central Machinery 14-inch bandsaw that I bought from Harbor Freight a few years ago. And I'm doing this video to share my experience with it in case you have one of these bandsaws or are contemplating buying one. And I think the video's got quite a bit of information in general about bandsaw use. I've been fairly pleased with this. I'm satisfied with this bandsaw, and I would buy one again. It has cast iron frame, cast table, full safety shielding, cuts 14 inches, will cut up to almost 6 inches thick material. It's got a dust collector port, a fairly decent stand, and it has blade tension and tracking adjustments, and has markings on here for different size blades from 1/8 to 1/4 to 1/2 up to 3/4 of an inch for tensioning the blades. It's a 4-speed bandsaw. It was a 4-speed bandsaw. In this video, I'm going to discuss what I saw were 3 major shortcomings with the saw and what I did to ameliorate them. Number one, dust collection. There is a dust collector port, but it proved to be almost of no value because it would just blow sawdust out all over the place, even with good suction at this dust collector port. So what I did, I'll just unhook this so I can hold it up a little further. Yes, we've moved. What I did is I cut a large hole in the bottom of the stand and put an elbow under here that I could connect to a 4-inch suction hose. And then I did what I could to block up the holes in this lower wheel compartment. Put some wood spacers in, some plugs for the holes, even made a piece here to fit below the shield. And at just below the blade, just above this port, I put in a sheet metal box to sort of contain the sawdust below the table. And I finally got what I think is acceptable dust collection. One of the first concerns I had with this saw was that it appeared to be underpowered. And when I read some of the current reviews from owners of this saw, that seems to be a common thread. Many of them talk about the saw being underpowered. I think possibly it is not underpowered, but in fact what we see as bogging down is simply belt slippage. I found that I couldn't tighten the belts enough to prevent slippage. So let me show you what I mean. The original setup for this saw, to make it a 4-speed saw, was that bolted to the bandsaw frame, just below the drive axle, was this 5-groove stepped pulley. And we had a belt running from this 1.5-inch pulley to the 6-inch pulley on the lower wheel axle. And then down below on the motor was a corresponding 4-step pulley so you could change the belt to provide 4 different speeds. Now, this 1.5-inch pulley, in my opinion, slipped too easily, even with it tightened to the point where I feared for the life of the bearings. It would slip on this 1.5-inch pulley. So here's my solution. And I made up a maple disc, 1¼ inches thick, and attached it with 8 number 10 screws to the old pulley and turned in place on the motor shaft a V-belt groove in it. I put a 3-inch sheave or 3-inch pulley on the motor shaft, and then I bought some of this link belt. Now there is no slippage between the motor and the bandsaw. If it bogs down, it's because the motor is stalling. But I must say, it takes a really heavy load to bog it down. I don't think it's underpowered at all. A third area of concern that I had with this saw was blade tension. And from what I read, that's a major concern with a lot of bandsaw owners, is that the markings on this slider on this bandsaw aren't very accurate. And I guess I've known for some time that I really didn't know where I was at with blade tension. That becomes such a large subject that I've made a separate video on measuring blade tension and recalibrating the saw for it. I use the saw mainly for preparing wood for my wood lathe, that is sawing blanks for my wood lathe, sawing log pieces into circles and creating turning blanks for my lathe. I also use it for resawing expensive hardwoods so I can make them go further, splitting 1 stalk into half, for example. And I use it for resawing these Rocky Mountain juniper logs. Very pretty, colorful wood in this locally grown Rocky Mountain juniper. And what I do is I flatten the opposing sides on my jointer so that I can make a center mark the length of the log, and then I run it through my bandsaw following the mark, splitting into 2 pieces. Then I can install my fence and cut it into 1-inch boards. Some tips on operating the bandsaw. One of the more difficult things to deal with is blade drift. And my take on blade drift is that there should be no blade drift. I try to adjust the tracking so that the center of the blade, that is the center from the gullet to the back, the center of the blade is riding at about the center of the wheel. And then test by running a piece of lumber into the saw and see if it's how it's tracking. If the blade is tracking off here to the left, I'll try and straighten the blade out by moving it further back on the band wheels, further back on the crown. So if that would represent the crown, I try to ride the blade so it's riding right on the peak of the crown, but if you move it further back on the crown, you can have the blade angle outwards, or if you move it down on the crown, you can have the blade angle inwards. So I test the tracking, test the drift of the blade, and then adjust the tracking to straighten it out. My fence has no adjustment for drift. It's parallel to the miter saw track in the table, and I set up the saw so that it has zero drift at the blade, and then I can rip and use the fence or the miter gauge easily. for cutting extra thick material, here's something that I owe Matthias at the wood sites, the Wood Gears site. Thanks for. For extra thick material, I can remove the upper blade guide and put in this wood block. I remove the stud that mounts the shield and put in this temporary wood block guide, and then I can get an extra inch or so of thickness for depth of cut. This is a metric bolt that attaches it in the same place as the mounting stud is attached. I've added a drawer to the stand for keeping supplies, and of course retracting casters. With the casters retracted, the saw sits firmly on its feet. The casters extended, I can roll it back and forth back into its proper spot. If you want to see more about how the retracting casters are made, I have a separate video on them, and I'd suggest that you go take a look at it. Anyway, I hope you found some of the information in this video useful and helpful. I want to thank you for watching. Thanks to everybody for subscribing, and I encourage you to, if you have not done so, to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to try and put a new video out every 10 days or so. And don't forget to check the like or dislike box below. Thank you for watching.